Assalamu alaikum. May the peace that only God can give be upon you. Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Radio Islam. I'm your host, Tariq Al-Amin, and we are broadcasting on WCEV 1450 AM. We're also streaming live at WCEV1450.com. If you are new to Radio Islam, we welcome you, and we also say Ramadan Mubarak to all of the fasters. Pray that your fast is going well, that you are receiving all of the healing and merciful benefits of this blessed month. We are a daily program airing every day from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central, and we're coming to you live from the wonderful city of Chicago, Illinois. And as I said, if you are new, you can keep up with us by following and liking our social media pages. You'll find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Radio Islam USA. And you will also be able to find us wherever you get your podcasts. That way you can check out those episodes that you may have missed. And once you hear them, you're going to want to revisit them. So you can also find us at Radio Islam USA. So if you're on SoundCloud, TuneIn, iTunes, or Google Play, that is where you will find us. And last but not least, if you would like to give us a call. Now remember, you can get at us on social media, but if you'd like to give us a call, you can do so at 312-750-1178. That's 312-750-1178. All right, Radio Islam family. There is quite a bit in the news, and as this is a holy month for the Muslim community, over 1.5 billion Muslims worldwide that are observing this sacred month, where we look to reconnect, reset, to engage in reflection and prayer and charity. These are things that we look to do, and at the end of the month, we hope to come out of it better individuals, better men, better women than we were when we came into it. But this is not a month simply of reflection, of fasting, of prayer. It is also a month where we continue to deal with a lot of the same ills that we faced prior to coming into this month. And one of those ills is we are dealing with not only Islamophobia in the West, but we are also dealing with outright violence that is taking place against Muslims across the globe in different spaces. And one of those spaces is India. And India is models itself as a democratic, secular country, nation. But there was a piece that I came across recently, and the title of that piece was "India: Violence Against Muslims Reaches Dangerous Tipping Point." And after reading it, I realized that we needed to have some discussion, bring more awareness about this. And fortunately, we are fortunate to have the writer, journalist C.J. Werleman, who is with us, and he is a columnist for the Middle East Eye and the New Arab, and host of Channel the Rage podcast. And he's the author of multiple books. And at this point, we'd like to thank him and greet him. C.J.?
Yes, how you doing?
All right. I'm doing well. Thanks for taking the time to come on and talk with us.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as I was reading the post, I noticed that as India proclaims itself as a secular society, and that there seems to be a connection in this idea of preserving that identity and violence against those who are open in their faith, not discounting a history of conflict in some cases, not all cases certainly, but in some cases between Hindu and Muslims. So that being said, how did this come to your attention, and what were you looking to achieve in sharing this news?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's the violence which is taking place in India at the moment, which has been carried out predominantly by Hindutva or Hindu extremists against Muslim populations, Muslim communities throughout the country. This is a new phenomenon, a relatively new phenomenon, which has really taken place since 2014 when Modi's BJP party seized power.
Right.
What you're seeing is far-right politics on the verge of fascism, scapegoating Muslims as the cause or as the cause of the country's social and economic ills, in very much the same way that the Nazi Party in Germany in the 1930s scapegoated the Jewish German population there. The violence has been ratcheting upwards, and to answer your question specifically, why did it come to my attention? Well, I've been following India very closely. As you might be aware, most of my journalism is focused on exposing and combating anti-Muslim discrimination and also taking on the Islamophobia industry. And increasingly and more, Indian Muslims are sending me video clips of communal violence which is taking place in their me tweets and emails and messages saying, CJ, can you please give coverage to what's happening here in India, because nobody in the Western media seems to be doing it. So, it's a story that needs to be told because, as you said in your intro, India's secular democratic nature or identity is really under threat by a far right-wing government, which is really on the verge of fascism and on the verge of tacitly supporting a genocide in that country. There's no other way to frame it.
Yes. And one of the things that you touched on in this piece in particular was the occurrence of Muslims who have already been victims, where maybe their families have been victims, but these families are being they are being come back to and terrorized again after they have sought protection or if they're looking to report. And is this a commonplace occurrence?
It is, and as I said, it's happening with the tacit support of the Indian government. Recently an 8-year-old Muslim girl was abducted, gang raped, and tortured over the course of a week or so in a Hindu temple by 8 Hindu extremist attackers. Now, those attackers, those killers, those rapists, have not only been feted as national heroes by the far right and by basically mainstream right-wing politicians in the country. But the lawyer who's representing the victim's family has been threatened with death. And you also had yesterday, you had a member of the Indian government, the member of India's ruling party, the BJP, lead a protest yesterday calling not only for the acquittal of the murderers, but calling for an investigation into the fact that they were charged in the first place.
And this definitely goes in line with statements that public officials, a minister I was looking, Vinay Katyar, who made a statement that Muslims should not stay in India. And to your point regarding Asifa, the 8-year-old girl, that the individual behind it, his intent was to terrorize and drive out the the Muslim nomads from the Hindu majority area. Well, at least that's the alleged reason behind it. So, in your reporting, in your investigation, are we seeing more, or I shouldn't say are we seeing more, but is this pattern holding up that violence is being used as a way to push Muslims out?
Exactly. It is a campaign of terror with that explicit purpose to drive Muslims out of India. That Hindutva ideology, which is very similar to the Nazi ideology, which promotes the idea of a master race, Hindus being the master, occupants of the Indian or the subcontinent. That is, I've written another piece in the past which has pointed to the popularity of the Nazi Party and also the popularity of Hitler amongst followers of the BJP and RSS, which is a non-governmental organisation, which pretty much provides the DNA to the BJP as far as their political and social identity is concerned. And at the very core of that is this Hindu nationalist ideology, which basically leaves no room for any non-Hindus in the country. And if you look at these murders which are taking place, these mob lynchings of Muslims, when these attacks occur, you will not see a single condemnation from any sitting member of the Indian government. So that is really giving tacit support to this violence.
Now I'm a bit ignorant as to the composition of India's of its national elected body. Are there Muslims that have been elected, or does it constitute solely of Hindu or other?
No, there are some Muslim elected officials in India's parliament. India, has 30-something states and representatives from within those states, and obviously states which you have a high Muslim population, there are, elected Muslim representatives in the parliament. But how much political sway or influence Muslims have in the parliament or in politics in general, or political discourse, is rapidly diminished. It really has been. Indian political discourse has really been hijacked by this extreme right-wing, ultra-nationalist type of rhetoric. Pretty much the same. If you think of Modi as Trump and you think of Trump supporters as followers of Modi's regime, then you're getting a pretty good idea of the climate which has been created in here at the moment.
Yes. Now, what do you say to those? And it's funny because I had an exchange with somebody on Twitter earlier that went on for probably about 10 hours.
Okay.
And it was centered around this idea that by naming the attackers, naming the people who have committed these lynchings or who are committing rapes or terrorism, by naming them as Hindu extremists, that this somehow is going to push those who are of the Hindu faith, who are, I guess you could say, mainstream or nonviolent or even friends to Muslims, that is going to push them away from acting in such a manner. And my thought on that was that was an absolutely ridiculous assertion. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a form of extremism. I mean, this violence, has nothing to do with Hinduism. The same way that the violence which is carried out by, psychopathic groups like ISIS has nothing to do really with Islam.
Sure.
The violence which is used by by ISIS is purely political, and it's about seizing territory and putting more territory, more people under its control. Mm-hmm. Hindutva, which is a perversion of Hinduism, the same way ISIS is a perversion of Islam, is being used to radicalize Hindus in a way which is inconsistent with the Hindu faith, but also does it in a way which outcasts or otherizes Muslims as the foreign enemy or as the external other. And it's for that reason that the rhetoric which comes from the far right in India paints India's 200 million Muslims as either agents of Pakistan or Pakistanis in disguise, or spies, foreign spies. And we've seen from lessons of history, when you demonize an out-group in such a way as an external threat, then violence usually ensues.
Yes. And of course, I think for me personally, being African-American and aware of the history of African-Americans in the United States and how the media, at the turn of the century, the reporting of Ida B. Wells, how she documented the lynchings of thousands of African-Americans. And it was quite often accompanied by coverage from the media that portrayed the victims as if they were aggressors, or portrayed them in ways where their humanity was stripped from them. So I see this very much in that same light.
And that's very much happening when you look at the media coverage of Israel's illegitimate and disproportionate use of deadly violence against unarmed Palestinian protesters in Gaza over the last 6 weeks.
Yes.
You see Palestinians in the media stripped of their humanity. You see sympathy expressed for the Israeli soldiers, the attackers, who are under no threat at all from Palestinian protesters who are basically shooting unarmed Palestinian protesters in the back from hundreds of meters away, securely positioned behind parapets. So it's, with that type of dehumanization, that type of otherization is not only happening in the context of Palestinians, it's not only happening in the context of black civil rights in this country, but it's also happening in the context of the rights of Muslims in India.
Yes. And let's go back, let's revisit this idea of using Hitler, a figure that is that will be infamously always connected to the dehumanization of a people, of the Jewish people, and their deaths. How is it, and how long, I should say, how long has it taken for Hitler to become adopted as a symbol of, or a celebrated figure of the BJP? Because I'm looking at in the article, I see a picture of a Hitler ice cream. It looks like a Hitler store, a little Hitler pub, or something like that. This is not something that it didn't just happen overnight. How long has that been in the works?
Yeah, it's happened from I guess the late 1990s to from the early 2000s. The RSS, which is a social cultural non-governmental organisation, which again, as I mentioned, provides a political DNA to India's ruling party, the BJP. There's always had an admiration for Hitler and the Nazis, because in Hitler and the Nazis they see a strong man who got rid of the undesirable other. And then, in Germany, where the undesirable other was the Jews, from a Hindu extremist or a Hindu nationalist point of view, the unacceptable or the undesirable other is India's 200 million Muslims. And for that reason, Hitler is celebrated amongst the far right in India. And as you pointed out, and as I pointed out in my piece, there are Hitler clothing boutiques, there's Hitler restaurants, Hitler ice cream, Hitler pubs. And this admiration for Nazism is also can be linked to the current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, because when he was the Chief Minister in Gujarat in 2004, the school textbooks which were under his control in his state portrayed Hitler as a savior of the German people, and included chapters under the headlines "Hitler the Supremo" and internal achievements of Nazism. Now, I'll say it again, the current Prime Minister of India, when he was in control of this state, Gujarat, he allowed textbooks into his state which praised Hitler and the Nazis.
Now, let me talk about, well, first I want to say this to the Radio Sound family. Now, we are quite aware that, and just to reiterate a bit of a point that you touched on, that extremism can be found in every religion or political ideology, and it is not something that is specific to Hinduism. But that being said, we do want to recognize that how people are hijacking faith, and they're using it to run counter to the best expression of their faith. And one of those ways is, as you pointed out, that there are extremists who are dressing as Muslims. They're putting on clothing that would identify them as Muslims. And there was one, it looks like it says, there was a gentleman that threw beef at a Hindu temple in an effort to incite violence against Muslims. And for those of you who, if you're not familiar with the Hindu faith tradition, the cow is sacred, is holy, and so that's certainly not something that would be met with anything other than disgust or deep anger or rage. So is this type of thing happening on a regular basis? And what was in this particular instance, what was the outcome?
The outcome in that particular instance, where I believe you're referring to, they threw beef at a temple, was it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that that's a common tactic used so that by those who wish to incite communal violence. You can go all the way back. It's been a common tactic since the dawn of age. Even the burning down the German Parliament was a way of it was used as an excuse to blame communists for the attack. This is a way of basically a classic false flag attack. I hate using that term because false flags have been used as a term to wrongly smear Assad's war crimes or school shootings and the like. But these really are, a textbook example of what a false flag attack looks like. You portray, or you basically frame a perpetrator for the purpose of inciting violence against that alleged perpetrator. And we see that happening more and more in India. Also, it's been exacerbated by social media and Facebook. So what happens is, in India, a group will accuse a Muslim community of either slaughtering a cow, eating beef, and then those rumours they passed on to social media, and instead of maybe a dozen people believing that rumour, when it's spread on social media, you might have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands believing that rumour, which just, obviously pours more fuel onto whenever violent attack follows. So, we're seeing the problem that Facebook is having in these countries, particularly in Southeast Asia and South Asia and Central Asia, where you have low literacy rates and where you have even lower information literacy rates. People will tend to believe anything they see or read on social media, and Facebook has been blamed for igniting the genocide against Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, has been blamed for the recent violence against Muslims in Sri Lanka, and it's also, launching a lot of violent attacks against Muslims in India.
To that point, I think you refer to that as the weaponization of social media, and rightly so. Has there been, to your knowledge, has there been a response from Facebook? Because they were certainly dragged in front of the public eye with regard to Facebook's role, or you being used as a platform to possibly sway the election, the last presidential election. So are they aware of how their platform is being used with regard to these instances?
They're certainly aware. When the recent violence against Muslims in Sri Lanka took place, the Sri Lankan representatives from the Sri Lankan government actually met with Facebook executives to discuss this very problem, because it was Facebook which really ignited the violence there. Not really a lot Facebook can do. There's a good example of how this is being combated is in Germany. Germany, obviously, with its history of genocide and ethnic cleansing against a religious minority, they've banned certain hate speech, and they've carried that through to Facebook, and that's really been seen as a model in Europe going forward. So they have dozens of full-time employees who scour social media for hate speech, for speech which could be used to ignite communal violence. But again, it's difficult because whilst it's easy to identify a post which is
CJ? Okay. Well, I would say, I hope you can hear us. I would say to that, the idea or the prospects of being able to use legislation to monitor or to curtail hate speech, that works when you have a willing legislative body. And as of right now, with the BJP, that's not something that's not an angle that would that they could really engage in, or they couldn't use them to be willing conduits for that type of prevention to take place.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. So let me ask, how long have you been following and advocating in this type of work?
Yeah, my history, I guess, is well documented. I got into journalism somewhat by accident. I witnessed an Al-Qaeda terrorist attack in 2005 in Indonesia, and my friends and I were basically first responders. That night, I sort of became obsessed with that terrorist attack and what would drive somebody to detonate themselves amongst innocent women and children. I wrote a book in response to that, which sort of became a bestseller here in the United States. That book was called "God Hates You, Hate Him Back," and And that book, whilst it wasn't about Islam, it sort of ridiculed religion and attacked religion for its violent text. But then I started studying terrorism, and I have a degree in counterterrorism now, and will soon have my master's in counterterrorism. And I've come to realize that my thesis that religion drives terrorists or individuals who carry out acts of violence against civilians was flawed and wrong. I realized that I had unwittingly become an Islamophobe in the type of rhetoric that I was espousing. I would use the same sort of Islamophobic tropes that you would hear from someone like Tommy Robinson in the UK, or maybe even Donald Trump or anyone in the far right in this country. So I've basically spent the last 10 years, I wrote a book in 2010 called Quran Curious, which is a guide to the life of the Prophet Muhammad and also to the Islamic scriptures. And it was doing the research for that book in particular which made me realize that my assumptions about Islam were wrong, and I was really basically only regurgitating erroneous Islamophobic tropes. So I've basically spent the last decade trying to right my wrongs and trying to warn others away from a path that I once took.
That's I don't think wonderful is a strong enough word. But
thank you.
Yeah, but that is wonderful. And in seeing that, but there certainly comes a point where you are fortunate enough to reflect on your own thinking, your own position, how you came to that position. And I'd like to transfer that realization to these spaces where we see violence taking place between religions. And what do you think the prospects are for that type of realization and reflection taking place on the ground in those spaces?
It's very difficult because you have political and cultural entrepreneurs who profit either politically or financially from creating divisiveness. And that's how politics works. You're always going to have political entrepreneurs which see an opportunity to build a political base by demonizing or stigmatizing an outgroup. Trump did that. Trump had no political base until he accused Barack Obama of being a foreign-born Muslim.
Right.
I mean, that was his first foray into politics. And by using Islamophobia and weaponizing that, that's how he built his political capital. If it wasn't for Islamophobia, there's no way there would be a President Donald Trump today. So you're going to have opportunists which are always going to see, there's always going to be divide and rule. Colonial rulers in the Middle East use divide and rule, as a successful strategy to hold them to power with very little, military presence. How you better educate a population to guard themselves against these type of sinister political tactics. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that. I mean, I hope and I envision that all we can do is keep creating awareness, keep working towards steering people away from those types of ideologies, those types of individuals, and win this on a case-by-case basis.
Yes. CJ, we need to take a short break. Can we do that? And we come back, I'd like to ask a little bit about your coverage with regard to Palestine as well.
Yep, sure. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Radio Islam family, we're talking with journalist CJ Werleman. And when we come back, we're going to get into our next phase of our conversation. This is Radio Islam on WCEV 1450 AM. The Syrian Community Network, with offices nationwide, serves its Chicago area clients from its Northside location located at 5439 North Broadway. They provide housing, social services, education, basic human needs, and food security. The Syrian Community Network has Arabic-speaking staff and is a partner organization of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. You can get more info by calling area code 872-806-0141. That's area code 872-806-0141, or by visiting their website at SyrianCommunityNetwork.org.
Hey, Mom, Why is the sky blue? Why don't animals talk? Why do dogs have wet noses? Why is an 11 pronounced 21?
Kids ask a lot of questions.
Why do I have a belly button?
But you don't have to know every answer.
Why is the ocean salty?
Because you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent.
Why are there 50 states?
There are thousands of children in foster care who don't need every question answered.
Why is pizza round?
They just need you. For more information on how you can adopt, go to adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Radio Islam, the nation's first daily live call-in talk radio show produced by Muslims for the mainstream market. Radio Islam, on the air since 2004 because of your generosity. Radio Islam salutes its most valuable asset, you, our listener. From our producers to our interns, we appreciate your support. Thank you.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Radio Islam. This is your host, Tariq El-Amin, and we are still broadcasting on WCEV 1450 AM, streaming live at WCEV1450.com. Remember, you can keep up with us on social media by following and liking our pages, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You'll find us at Radio Islam USA. That's the same username you use to get us wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're on TuneIn, iTunes, Google Play, or SoundCloud, you'll find us at Radio Islam USA. We are joined on the phone by C.J. Werleman. He is a journalist with the, excuse me, and we've been talking, in the first half, we talked about a piece that he wrote with regard to the violence against Muslims in India. And as one who covers Islamophobia and anti-Muslim violence and oppression, well, I would say worldwide. Would that be a correct description?
Yeah,
CJ.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's pretty accurate.
Okay. Yes. So Palestine, the violence that has been inflicted on Palestinians. Especially with regard to nonviolent protests, nonviolent demonstrations, as you mentioned earlier, that they're being shot by snipers, and this really puts the person of just regular conscience. It puts them in a position where they have to, well, they hopefully are moving away from this automatic stamp of approval for anything that is done by the Israeli state. And I'm speaking of that person of conscience, in particular within the United States. And that has been something that has been, it's been just almost the de facto position that most individuals and certainly our legislature has taken. And you have written that those sympathies are changing and that unconditional political support is coming to an end. Do you see that starting to play out with regard to the responses of politicians and just people in general?
Yeah, you're seeing a changing of the guard in the U.S., for lack of a better way of phrasing it. Whereas, for the past 70 years of Israel's creation or existence, Israel has enjoyed bipartisan support for most of that journey from both political parties within the United States, the Democratic Party and Republican Party. But you're seeing a changing of that now. And so because the progressive base, younger Democratic voters, which, are providing the energy for the Democratic Party, are becoming vehemently opposed to, Israel's 50-year-long occupation. They can't stomach the illegal occupation. They also can't stomach the apartheid and also the routine and periodic, state terrorism which Israel carries out against the Palestinian people. So you're seeing a stripping away of support amongst the Democratic base. The older-faced Democrats like Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumer's, they'll continue to stand by Israel no matter what. In fact, Chuck Schumer is at the moment helping co-sponsor a bill in Congress with Republicans, which will basically criminalize the support of the boycott movement against the Israeli state.
Yeah, the BDS.
Which is basically unconstitutional because to boycott is a speech act, and a speech act is protected by the First Amendment. But the point of being is younger voters don't identify with the politics of the older Democratic stalwarts, and so in the coming years, whether it's this election cycle or the one after it or the one after that, you're going to see the Democratic Party position or the party platform change to one that strongly and in no uncertain terms condemns Israel's occupation. And then when that happens, Israel will become a wedge issue in American politics because the louder that the left supports Palestinian liberation, the more the right reflexively will oppose it. And once that becomes a wedge issue in American domestic politics, then really the jig is up for Israel, because Israel won't enjoy unconditional support from the U.S. at the United Nations, and the level of funding that it has enjoyed for the last 50 years will certainly change to the detriment of the Israeli state.
Mm. And do you think when that level of funding changes and that lack of bipartisan support changes, that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back with regard to it being an apartheid state?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we at the moment, U.S. taxpayers give Israel $10 million per day. And most of that money is used to buy weaponry, while Israel provides its own citizens with universal health care, something the Americans are deprived of. So we're giving away our weapons for free, our tax money away for free, and we're getting nothing in return for it. So that's one side of it. But also the U.S. has protected Israel at the United Nations with a veto power at the Nations Security Council. Once that veto pen is removed, or that veto power protection is removed from Israel, and then UN resolutions are able to pass, which whether that's sanctions on Israel, whether that's outright condemnation of its colonial project, well, then Israel really is faced with one or two options: either comply with international law, or be officially deemed a pariah in the international community, one that is sanctioned and one of which has inflicted massive economic costs upon the same economic costs which ultimately brought an end to apartheid in South Africa in the late 1980s.
Right. Speaking of the late 1980s, we have a new, I'm not going to say a new demographic, but certainly a visible and I guess growing the millennials, and a lot of that generation, I would go so far to say, are not really aware of some of that history of apartheid, of Jim Crow. And I was looking at another piece, is that the history of Jim Crow, of apartheid, that it lasted only for so long, and possibly as they become more aware of that history, that would also become a part of of that resistance, and that break with this unfettered access to support. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point. I mean, you've got to be aware of history to change the future. So yeah, that I'm always skeptical of pieces which demonize millennials as know-nothings or are ignorant. I think I think those kind of think pieces have been trotted out as dime a dozen, just because basically they're clickbait for people my age and older. Yeah, we've always wanted to demonize the younger generation as dummies. That's the way it's always worked, and I think they're a lot smarter than that. And I think that the Trump presidency has ushered in a new civil rights movement. You just have to see that with the amount of people on social media and also marching in the streets in support of civil rights movements today, something which was maybe absent a decade ago. So I think millennials are becoming increasingly more politically conscious, aware of the past, aware of what needs to be done going forward. And I think they should be supported.
Very good point. Very good point. And I want our millennial listeners to know I am not throwing any shade. I am not, not at all, not at all. But just within the context of just being aware of that history, and I think history is also appreciated by those who have benefited from it. So I guess what I'm saying here is that the system has worked for a few, and those who are aware of how that system has worked are interested in preserving it. So that would be on the side of those who have supported Israel with no questions. But as people become aware have become aware that these are not sustainable systems, that these are immoral systems, that once, to go back to what you said, the jig is up. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, CJ, it has been a pleasure talking with you. I would like to ask, how can our Radio Islam family, how can the listeners keep up with you on social media or websites or anything like that?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. My Twitter is at CJ Werleman. That's CJWERLEMAN, CJ Werleman. They can find me on Facebook under the same name.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on. I've enjoyed the chat.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, Radio Islam family. That was CJ Werleman. And I certainly would recommend Googling him and checking out some of the work that he has done. And I'll share this observation with you. And I probably should have brought this up in our conversation just now, but there is something to be said about it's important that we advocate for ourselves, right? Whatever we are. I mean, if we are part of the population that is being distressed or oppressed, it's important that we advocate for ourselves. It's important that we take a stand and we take our own, we take our future in our own hands, right? That's very important. But it is a telling truth that when we have people who come from or who look like, all right, I'll say look like, who look like they might be in that group of folks who are a part of the problem, who are part of the oppressive structure, who actually come out and you find out that these are people who are in opposition to oppression. These are people who are advocates for liberation. They're advocates for human dignity. It is something to be said about how their voices are received, and I think that has always been true about historically. That has always been true historically about any societal shift or changes. It has never simply just been those who are oppressed that rise up and fight and protest, but it has always been people who are also from the quote unquote don't take me to task on this, but that come from the ruling class, if you will, right, or who would fit in or who would not be the recipients of oppressive measures or tactics. It has always been that when those people join in as well, that it brings that maybe those who would not hear the voices of the oppressed, but they possibly may hear those voices. So I'm extremely thankful whenever I see people of conscience, whatever their background. Right now, CJ obviously is a white man, right? But what he said was he had basically been indoctrinated into a thinking, or he held beliefs that were anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, and that comes about through just being in the system, being a part of the system, and not necessarily being an informed actor, but just basically repeating and regurgitating the lines that you're given. So his moment of clarity, as he speaks about, once that moment came to him, as he said, made it his mission to undo or to keep people from following in those same footsteps. And I think that is a position of responsibility. It's a position that I respect. And I think it's one that should be lauded. So that being said, it takes humanity to save humanity. It is not just the job of those who have a foot on their neck. It's not just the job or the responsibility of those who are being mistreated to fight for themselves, but it's also the job of those who stand as witnesses, who see mistreatment, who see oppression going on. And I bring us back to, for those of us who are reading, I like to always go back to, right? Oh, you who believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to God, right? Even as against yourselves, right? And this is something that is extremely important in the climate that we live in today, where so much of the news we accept, or so much of the news that we promote, or the views we accept, or the views we promote, is based upon what is beneficial for us as individuals or our particular group. It is not what is beneficial. It's not what is best for. It's not what is best in the sight of Allah. It's not what's best in the sight of God. And if we are disciplined enough or reflective enough to take that type of stance, then really that's the only way to get past partisanship. That's the only way to get past special interest. And I also go back and tell you, when Allah introduces the Quran to us, He says, this is the book and it is guided sure without doubt. There is no, meaning that there is no special interest. There is no particular benefit for any particular group of people, no particular ethnic group, no particular gender, no particular, no particular label, whatever it is you want to carry. But it is beneficial for those who believe in God, right? For those who believe not just in this life, but in the life to come, who believe in what they can see, but also realize that there's an entire world that we don't see. So these have real world application for us. And as we opened up the program talking about the piece that he wrote with regard to the violence that's taking place in India, we also recognize that violence is taking place in many places around the world, whether we're talking about the Rohingya, whether we're talking about Syria, whether we're talking about Yemen, or we're talking about issues like mass incarceration right here in the United States of America, or we're talking about imposed poverty. And if you don't understand that term, maybe we'll come back to it at some other time. But we don't understand systemic and institutional oppressions and inequalities, and these all rest on this idea of one group being able to benefit from these inequalities, one group being able to benefit from the oppression, from the pain of another group. And for us to be whole, for us to be healed, we all have to be healed. There's no scenario in a pluralistic society where one group is doing well and another group is not, and there's peace. There's no peace in situations like that. So the prayer during this month, even as we're talking about this news, which is disturbing, whether like I said, take your pick, throw a dot at a map, and you will find upsetting and unnerving situations. But the counter to that is to embrace this idea of being acceptable in the sight of Allah, being acceptable as a witness to justice, right? And a justice that is not defined upon what is beneficial simply for me or for you, but what is just in the sight of God. And if we get to that point, I think, or if we make it a focus, if we make it a point to move in that direction, then we will see our politics improve. We will see health improve. We will see every facet of human life begin to improve, inshallah, with Allah's, if it be Allah's will. Okay, I think I've said enough. All right. So we want to share a few things with you all during this blessed month. We want to share some of the things with regard to Sound Vision, some of the very important and critical work that we do that is only possible with your continued support. We'd like to let you know that about the crisis text line. If you are not familiar with the crisis text line, this is a line which helps individuals who are in need of help, and most often this is our texting generation, right? But it's open to all ages. This is a free and anonymous 24/7 text line, which has 6.7% of the people texting about suicide, while 36% sought help for anxiety and depression. So this has been a resource that has been used by the community, by those in need, and all you have to do is to text SALAM. That is 741-741. 741-741. Text SALAM to that. We also remind you that Adam's World ages, excuse me, I go back, excuse me. The crisis text line is helping young Muslims of different age groups in multiple ways. Adam's World, age 2 to 7. We're working day and night to relaunch Adam's World to strengthen younger children. And Dawood Warnsby Ali is working on developing new songs for it. So that's something that we're definitely looking forward to. And we also have teachers training, ages 8 to 16. So these are the youth that those teachers are working with. And 50% of young Muslims of this age face huge amounts of bullying. And we need to strengthen them in many ways. And one method we're using is training of their teachers, assisting those who are spending very important and developmental in time in developing these young people, their spirits and their minds. And lastly, we'll mention the media training. College and universities, we have 4 media trainings that are planned, and we plan to do 12 this year at campuses where Muslim students and their allies will learn together on telling their story, creating and controlling their narrative through the media. So we're going to continue to talk to you more about this important work and ways that you continue to support. But the first thing we can tell you is simply to go to soundvision.com, and you can click on the donate button. You can see the work that we are doing. We've been doing for over for 30 years now, and we look forward to continuing to serve the Muslim community, its future leaders, and we can only do that with your continued support. So we thank you in advance, and we pray that we are worthy and continue to show ourselves worthy of your support. So we want to go ahead and thank our engineer over at WCEV, Ramon. Thank you very much. We thank our engineer in studio, the impressive one, Ibrahim Beg. I'm your host and producer, Tariq Al-Amin. We thank our guest again, CJ Werleman, and we thank our executive producer, Abdul Malik Mujahid. That being said, we remind you that the views expressed by the host and our guests are theirs and not to be taken as a representation of Sound Vision, Inc. And with that, good people, Ramadan Mubarak, and we wish you a good evening, and we leave you as we greeted you, Assalamu alaikum. May the peace that only God can give be upon you.